today? We're having fun? It's a good day? All right. Just want to tell you a little story. So my supervisor was standing at the door talking to my client. And after about 10 minutes, she was getting kind of frustrated. It wasn't really working. And she got up and she started walking away. And as she walked away, I asked if I could talk to our client. And she said, sure, go ahead, give it a shot. So I walked over to the door and I looked in. And I noticed a couple things right off the bat. One, it was a steel door. Two, my client was inside there, was naked. And three, my client was covered in his own feces from head to toe. Now the first thing I'll tell you is when I went up to the steel door with the little window in it, like maybe the front door of your house, it tells you that it was a prison. It was a men's maximum security prison, and the person inside there was an inmate, and I was a correctional officer or a prison guard. So I'm going to tell you why I think I was the ideal prison guard to talk to this person. So there's three things why I thought I was the ideal prison guard. One, I couldn't smell. I had no sense of smell. So I wasn't dry heaving or wanting to vomit or anything like that. Two, I had the skill of listening. And three, that I actually cared about the inmates. Now let me tell you a little bit of something about prison. Prison is not a correctional facility. They put it on the sign out front, but what a prison actually is just a big warehouse for people who have committed violent crimes. They've committed murder, serial rape, armed robbery, serious assaults. That's what a prison is. But let me go back to the story and talk to my inmate in the room there. So I went up to the door and I just said, hey, what happened? And he was pretty agitated at that point. He proceeded to just scream and yell at me and tell me what the problem was. He threatened me, he threatened my family. But I just stood there for about 2 to 3 minutes and I just listened. That's all I had to do was just listen. And after, like I say, after a couple minutes, he kind of started to calm down a little bit. And and I was able to get another question in, and I just asked him, I said, what do you need? And he said, well, he says, I'm a grown man. He says, I don't want to be in the suicide gown. I don't want this bag meal. I want clothes and a hot meal. I said, well, you know, that's something that I cannot give you. I said, but your therapist is standing right over here. Let me go ask her, and I'll see what she says. So I went over and asked the therapist. I said, what does he need to do to get clothes and a hot meal? She says, he needs to cease his negative behavior for 24 hours. No more naked, no more feces, no more yelling and screaming. I said, okay, sounds good. I went back over to the cell, and I told him exactly what the therapist had said. I said, do you think you can do that? He says, no way. He says, there's no way I can do 24 hours like that. Just do whatever you got to do to me, gas me, do a cell entry on me. I don't care about myself anymore. Just do whatever you have to do. And I said, can you stand a little bit closer to the door? I said, way I don't have to talk as loud. So he stood a little bit closer to the door. I stood a little bit closer to the door. And I said, I want to tell you a little story. I said, outside of here, I belong to a 12-step group. And they have a motto, and it says, one day at a time, 24 hours at a time. I said, but you know, a lot of times I can't do 24 hours. I can't do 12 hours. I can't do 6. I can't even do 3 hours. But what I can do is I can do 1 hour. I can do 60 minutes. What about you? Do you think you can give me 60 minutes? And he kind of hesitated, kind of hung his head a little bit and said in a quiet voice, maybe. I said, you know what? I'll take maybe. Because you know what? I've seen you do 60 minutes before. I've seen you be successful with 60 minutes. And I believe that you can do it. So here's what's going to happen now. Here's what's going to happen now. I said, I'm going to get some other guards coming up here. They're all dressed in riot gear, but they're not going to hurt you. They're going to pull you out of your cell. They're going to put you in the shower. They're going to clean you up. They're going to put you in a clean cell with a clean gown and blanket. And then you know what you're going to do? You're going to give me 60 minutes. And when you're done with that 60 minutes, then you know what I want? Then I want another 60 minutes. And when you're done with those 60 minutes, you know what I want then? I said, then I want another 60 minutes. And you're going to give me a couple 60 minutes, and then it's going to be bedtime. And you're going to go to bed, you're going to sleep for maybe 6 to 10 hours or so, and then you're going to wake up and you're going to have maybe 10 hours left. But you're not going to do 10 hours. You're going to do 1 hour. And when you're done with that hour, you're going to do 1 more hour. So what's the end of this story? You think he was successful? Did he do 24 hours? Yes, he did. He did 24 hours. He got his clothes and he got his hot meal. And I know what you guys are thinking. You're thinking it probably like, huh, this guy standing before you must be some kind of like super guard or these extraordinary capabilities that I have, right? Well, the answer to that is yes. I was that guard. I did have that super guard mentality. I had extraordinary capabilities because I could do one thing very well, and that was to listen. I could listen to what his needs were. I could listen to what his problems were. I could listen to what he was talking about. And I know what you're all thinking too, is like, listen? That's pretty common sense. That's pretty simple. Why is that such groundbreaking news up here? I'll tell you, that's not how prison works. Let me tell you how prison has worked for the last 100 years and still works today. A guard, that's me, talking to an inmate. Let's talk about a guard for just a second. A guard spends more time with the inmate than anybody else, more than a lieutenant or captain or warden, or even more than the therapist. A guard is with the inmate for 8 hours a day. That's more time than I spend with my family every day. So a guard tells an inmate to do something. Inmate doesn't want to do it. Guard gets a couple more of his buddies, puts him in chains, maybe puts him on a restraint board or restraint chair, puts him in a cell for 23 out of 24 hours a day. And that's how that works. He gets off the restraint chair after a couple hours. We tell him to do something. He doesn't do it. Guess what happens? Put him in them chains, put him back in that chair. Put him back in that cell. That's how prison works. That's how prison has worked in the past. That's how it's still working today. So let's kind of take a look at that. So that inmate, when there's a conflict, learns from the guards that when there's a conflict, I'm going to solve that conflict by force. You do that every day, every month, every year, for 20 years, for 30 years, for 40 years. What are you teaching that inmate? How to handle conflict? Are you teaching conflict resolution skills? Are you teaching, hey, you know what, you get out, you run into a problem, do what we've always told you how to do. So what do we do now with inmates? Well, what we do now with inmates, they're going to get out of prison. We give them an education, a GED, maybe some college. We teach them a skill, maybe computers or woodworking or metal shop or something like that. We find them a job on the outside. We find them housing. Maybe we get a community resource center to offer support for them, or maybe get a church to help them out. We put them in this nice, pretty package, and we put them out in the community. And it used to be, now, an inmate, when an inmate hit the community, you could tell right away because they had tattoos all over their face, arm, body. But not anymore. And now everybody's got tattoos and all over their face and arms and everything, so you can't really tell who the inmate is. They're not going to have a little tattoo that's up here that says, I'm a serial rapist. They're not going to have a little tag that said, I spent 25 years in a men's maximum security prison. They're going to be out there among us. They're going to be our electricians, our plumbers, our carpenters, maybe our roofers. So what's the number one thing that I want that inmate to have? Do I want him to have a job in a house? Sure, absolutely. But is that the most important skill that I want that person to have? No. I want them to have conflict resolution skills. Because the first time they come out to my community, or your community, or your community, or your community, the first time they run up against a customer that gripes about their work, or the first time they have to deal with a supervisor that has to reprimand them, what are they going to fall back on? They're going to fall back on how they were taught by the guards day in, day out how to deal with conflict, and that's by force. So they're going to go off on me, on my wife, on my kids, or on your spouse, or your grandparents, or your kids. Don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. So guards, that every interaction they have with these inmates, day in, day out, every single interaction, they have to be thinking about one, about listening and about how to solve that problem, how to help them solve that problem themselves with conflict resolution skills instead of by force. Let me tell you another little story. This inmate Blackfeather came into prison when I did, 20 years, 1 month, and 1 day ago. And he was in there for murder, and it was in the night shift. So I fed him his evening meal, I delivered his mail, his supplies, even toilet paper. And him and I just kind of developed this rapport, this mutual respect with each other. And we got out of segregation. I saw him everywhere. I saw him in the yard, I saw him in the gym. He worked in the kitchen for a while. I saw him in education and industry. And I even saw him once when he got out of a talk with his therapist. And he came to me for a pad search so he could go back to his unit. And I said to him, I said, I overheard what you were talking about in there. You're talking about your anger. I said, I got anger issues too. And him and I stood together, toe to toe, about 3 feet apart, and we talked about our anger. I told him about how I handled anger poorly with people, and he listened. And he told me how he handled anger with people, and I listened. And at times, that conversation got pretty intense. And at the end of that conversation, after about 20 minutes, he stuck out his hand for me to shake his hand, and I shook his hand. And I went, oh, I've just crossed the line. Guards don't shake the hands of inmates. And I'm like, oh, I'm never doing that again, and I never did. But what I did do with Blackfeather is I challenged him. When I'd see him in segregation, I'd go, what are you doing? Why are you getting in fights? Why do you continue to yell at staff? Why do you continue to get in fights? You're a grown adult man. Use your brain. Use this to solve your conflicts in a nonviolent way. I challenged him over and over and over again for more than 20 years. I challenged Mr. Blackfeather to change his ways. And he did. When I retired from prison, I told 2 inmates that it was my last day. Mr. Blackfeather was one of them. I went down to his cell at lunchtime. He was sitting in his cell on his bed eating his lunch. And I opened the door and I walked in and I told him, I said, today is my last day. I'm retiring today. And he wished me well. He said he was going to miss me. And I told him that I was going to miss him as well. And I asked him, I said, do you have a chance of getting out of prison? And he said he had a slight chance, but it was one that he could pin his hopes to. And I said, well, I hope you do get out of prison. I said, because you're a changed man now. You're not the Blackfeather. You're not the Blackfeather that I knew 20 years ago. You've changed your ways. You've learned how to deal with your conflict in a non-violent way. You've done that so much that other inmates come to you to seek out your advice on how to handle their conflict. Even if you can't get out of prison, don't stop what you've been doing. Keep going forward because you've changed. You're a better man now. He stood up and came at me. And usually when a guard would say an inmate came at me, it would mean a totally different thing here. But he stood up and he came at me and extended his hand. And this time I shook his hand. I was shaking the hand of a man who had truly changed his ways. I want to read a little quote for you right now that I think sums up what I talked about here today. Quote, it takes more courage to reveal insecurities than to hide them, more strength to relate to people than to dominate them, more manhood to abide by thought-out principles rather than blind reflex. Toughness is in the soul and spirit, not in muscles in an immature mind. End quote, by Alex Kars. So where do I go from here? Where do we go from here? That question, really? I don't know the answer. Maybe this talk is a start forward to changing the prison communication model. I hope it is. 2 guards to the yard, 10-4. Thank you.